And thank you to everyone here for joining me today. I'm super excited to talk with all of you in this session, which I like to call Poem Plus Prompt, to talk with you about the work of Amy Nezugumatadil, whose poems I've admired for a very, very long time, and as well as her prose. So we'll take some time today to listen to her read a poem. We'll unpack the poem together, and then we'll do a little bit of writing together with a prompt inspired by her poem. And this kind of session that I call Poem Plus Prompt is based on my belief that every poem is a teacher. So we have something to learn, usually many things to learn from every poem, even poems we don't like. But hopefully you'll like today's poem as much as I do. So what I'd love to do is just start with some brief introductions in the chat. If you could please put in your name, your pronoun. Oops, someone's, Ellen, I think you'll need to mute your mic and see. And Miriam, I'm going to ask you to mute. Okay, there we go. Thank you. In the chat, I'm going to ask you to put in your name, your location, however you'd like to describe it, and one sort of little known fact about you, something that maybe even friends and family are not really aware of. It can be something small. I was trying to think of my own before we started, and I was realizing I don't often talk about the fact that one of the things I loved when I was growing up was watching my older sister listen to the top 40 countdown, which she would do with a piece of paper and a pen. And she would write down every single song in the top 40 countdown as Casey Kasem was counting down. And if she had to run to the bathroom or go get a drink of water, she would always assign one of us to cover in the meantime. So there's my little known fact. And I invite you to put something of yours in the chat as well. So name, location, pronouns, and a little known fact. And I'll just type that in. Okay, and also we'll look at those as they come in, but we'll go ahead and start digging into today's poem, which is called "In Praise of My Manicure." And those of you who might have just joined us, there's a link here in the chat. It's basically my website. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me do this again. To get today's PDF that will have the poem, the guiding questions, and the prompt, you can go to my website, www.dilrubaahmed.com/PPP, and that stands for Poem Plus Prompt. I'll put that in a couple times so it's easy for you to find it, but I'm going to go ahead and share that on the screen so that we can take a look at the poem together. Okay, so there's the link again, if you need it, and here's the text of the poem. Whenever I'm teaching a poem, I always try to find a video or audio of the poet reading their poem. And so fortunately, in this case, I did find a video of Amy Nezugumatadil reading her poem aloud. So I'm going to jump over to that and we'll hear her read. Oh, and well, before we do, let's, I see all these introductions coming through the chat. So let me just share a few of these out loud. So we've got Anne Ellen, sorry, she loves to sing. Eunice is calling in from Rome. She likes stealing things. Oh my, that could make very interesting material for a poem. Mona is calling in from Indiana and is a Gemini, writing since age 5. Miriam is a poet from Seattle, writing since age 13. I love hearing about these poets who've been writing since they were kids. Cass from southeastern British Columbia, in view of the Rockies. Oh, envious. Took a bicycle repair course years ago. That's something I need to do. And Kevin from New Haven is a big fan of Sesame Street. All right, if you haven't had a chance or if you've just joined, feel free to put in your name, location, pronouns, and a little known fact about you in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the video of Amy Nezugumatadil reading her poem. Does everybody see a YouTube screen? Okay, great.
Thank you so much for supporting poetry and for supporting Copper Canyon Press. In praise of my manicure. Because I was taught all my life to blend in, I want my fingernails to blend out. like preschoolers who stomp their rain boots in a parking lot, like coins who wink at you from the scatter bottom of a fountain, like red starfish who wiggle a finger dance at you, like green-faced Kathakali dancers who shape their hands into a bit of a hello with an Anjali. I tell you, from now on, I and my children and their children will hold four fingers up. A palavam, a fresh sprout with no more shame, no more shrink. And if the bright colors and glittered stars of my fingernails scare you, I will shape my fingers into a sar parisasu, my favorite, a snake, sliding down my wrist and into each finger. Just look at these colors, so marvelous, so fabulous, say the two snakes where my brown arms once were. See that movement near my elbow, now at my wrist? A snake heart can slide up and down the length of its body when it needs to. You'll never be able to catch my pulse, my shine.
Okay, so take a moment, take about 60 seconds to just jot down some initial responses to the poem. Anything that stood out, any questions that came to mind, and then I'll play it again so you can hear it again. And if your microphone is not on mute, if you wouldn't mind muting it, that would be great. Thank you.
Can't go. Do this.
YouTube ads, I'm sorry. Okay, and this can be rough, just initial thoughts about what you heard, anything that's standing out to you. And in just a moment, I'll play the poem again. Okay, does everybody see the YouTube screen again? Great. All right, here we'll hear it a second time and then we'll dig in.
Copper Canyon Press. In praise of my manicured. Because I was taught all my life to blend in, I want my fingernails to blend out. Like preschoolers who stomp their rain boots in a parking lot, like coins who wink at you from the scatter bottom of a fountain, like red starfish who wiggle a finger dance at you, like green-faced Kathakali dancers who shape their hands into a bit of a hello with an Anjali. I tell you, from now on, I and my children and their children will hold four fingers up. A palavam, a fresh sprout with no more shame, no more shrink. And if the bright colors and glittered stars of my fingernails scare you, I will shape my fingers into a sar parisasu, my favorite, a snake, sliding down my wrist and into each finger. Just look at these colors, so marvelous, so fabulous, say the two snakes where my brown arms once were. See that movement near my elbow, now at my wrist? A snake heart can slide up and down the length of its body when it needs to. You'll never be able to catch my pulse, my shine.
Okay. I'm just going to pull up the PDF with the text of the poem. And those of you who've just joined in the chat, there is a link to this PDF. So you can download a local copy if you'd like. So you've written down some initial responses to the poem, and then for this round, I'd like you to take another 60 seconds or so and just jot down any craft strategies that are specifically standing out to you that seem important to the poem. So I'll leave the text here so you can take a look and jot down for yourself any specific craft strategies, even if you're not sure what it is that the poet is doing, that seems to be important for the poem. Take another minute or so to jot down any further observations. Okay, so let's start by hearing some of your responses to the poem, and then we'll sort of keep drilling down and try to figure out what is the poet doing here? How has she accomplished the effects that she's creating? But let's start with any initial responses you have to the poem, just sort of open responses as a reader. What are some things that you noticed about the poem, or anything that might have surprised you, or things you have questions about? And as you know, the session's being recorded. You don't feel obligated to have your camera off, but I do encourage you to jump in and respond to questions, because I very much want this to be a conversation. So who'd like to share their thoughts? Mona, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mona, and then Anne Ellen.
I like that she says, if the stars scare you, she'll make her fingers into snakes. So if one thing scares you, she's going to make it even worse.
And I missed the first part of what you said. Meaning if the starfishes are scary, then she's escalating to something that might actually be a little more threatening or risky, or have them bite.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, interesting modulation of tone there, right? To go from, I imagine starfish have some kind of defenses. I don't know a lot about them, but the idea of wiggling a finger dance is much different from a snake slithering up and down, sort of hissing some words.
Yes.
And Ellen, go ahead.
I like the couplet structure. It sort of sucks you in to read more. And the way she uses parts of the body and movement, and pairing that with, and it's very sensuous in a way, finger dance and snakes, and you can just imagine all kinds of beautiful movement. And then the first line is, because I was taught all my life to blend in. There's progression, because the last line is, you'll never be able to catch my pulse, my shine. So she's using that movement to show her strength.
Yeah, absolutely. That opening line, because I was taught all my life to blend in, that really sets the stage for everything that comes in the poem, right? That the relationship between that and the title, I think, is very intriguing, and something we can take away from, because the idea of praising one's manicure, right? This is something on the on the exterior, and then the first line sort of complicating that with this statement that this declaration that this speaker was taught all her life to blend in. And the idea of the couplets here working together, and the other things in the poem that sort of supporting the idea that things are being paired, right? There's the body and the movements that it makes in dance. So there's the body and the animal shapes it can make in dance. There's I, the speaker, right? And you, right? I tell you, you'll never catch. So, and there's a kind of tightness to the couplet formation, where we're getting information in sort of small chunks, so to speak, and with that white space in between, that gives us a chance to kind of digest what's happening. But at the same time, you might notice that in some of these couplets across the stanzas, Nezuko Matadil is using enjambment to sort of propel us from one couplet to the next. So she's definitely leveraging lineation as well as stanzaic form to pace our reading and to control the the speed at which we read through the poem, and the speed at which we sort of gather and absorb information, so to speak. What else? Other observations or questions even? What are some other things you notice? And oh, Mona, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The snakes talk to each other about the colors, how marvelous and fabulous the colors are. So the snakes are admiring her where her brown arms were as they move. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So these motions that are part of dance, part of classical or Kathakali dance, the speaker is using them to further complicate, to deepen what we know is the tension at hand, which is the idea of being told to blend in versus expressing oneself, right? And specifically, the speaker is talking about how she reacts in front of her children when there are people who might expect her to act a certain way. And so the idea that the snakes, what's speaking in the poem is the speaker, right? The first person narrator. And then the snakes that are imagined in these dance moves that are sliding up and down her wrists. And I find it very intriguing that the little snippet of dialogue that the poet gives us is full of S sounds, right? Just look at these colors, so marvelous, so fabulous. It's sort of emphatic and full of delicious sonic sounds that we might expect from a snake figure in a poem, and an element of exaggeration, right? So there's this sort of animation that's going on with these figures of the snakes going up and down her arms, so that she's not the only one speaking up in terms of her and defending her own self-expression. Cass, go ahead.
Because there are a number of words in this with which I am not familiar, it arouses my curiosity and encourages me to dig deeper.
Yeah, there are diction choices here that are not from the English language. And many of you probably already know that Amy Nazukumantatil's heritage is that her father is from South India and her mother is Filipino. And so the words that she's using here are in an Indian language, the terms of dance. And she doesn't provide, definitions for those. They're not actually in italics. So it's not until we reach them that we have any cue that they're not English words. The only words in italics are the little snippet of dialogue from the snake. And so it's a kind of destabilizing move, but I think very much intentionally done by the poet, which is to say, for writers who are writing from a heritage that is multilingual, it's a political choice whether or not there's a note or a kind of definition that eases that passage through the word for the reader, or not. And in this case, I think that the poet is carefully she's provided enough context. Right, Mona's saying, there's enough around in the surrounding words to figure out what these are. So she's provided narrative and sensory details to contextualize these specific dance moves so that we get some idea of what they are, right? Her favorite, the sorry, I won't get this right, Sarparasirisu, she tells us that's a snake, 4 fingers up, a palavam, a fresh sprout. So she's giving us enough context so that we understand those as we encounter them in the poem. What else?
I was also going to say, it's like those words are like an invitation to get to know me. This is who I am. This is where I come from. This is who I embody.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that it makes you curious, right? It invites some inquiry into like who has these words in their lexicon? Where are they coming from? And there's a little bit of context on the second page of this PDF in which Amy Nazukumantatil explains that, especially with a name as multisyllabic and, clearly not from the English language, that there were many times when she had to deal with people mispronouncing her name or even sort of teasing her about her name. And so this idea that as an adult, she's wanting to kind of figure out how to respond to that in front of her children in ways that feel authentic to her is part of what the poem is about. Donna, and then Mona.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the alliteration and the sound devices, especially all of the S sounds that come all the way through, and they kind of glom together toward the mention of the snake, but also the diction choice of the sh sound of shame and shrink, which is almost like a hush, refers back to being hushed. But preceded by no more shame, no more shrink, like no more staying hushed up. I thought was an interesting word choices. But I also had a question about the way in which the beginning seems to make a claim for not, refusing to go into the background. And yet at the last line is, you won't catch me. You will never be able to catch my pulse, my shine.
Yeah, let's talk about that. First of all, I'll respond to what you said about the sonic devices here. Lots of music that Amy Nezukumatatil has created with her diction choices, with her use of repetition. So we have both the repetition of phrases like no more, right? No more shame, no more shrink, which creates a kind of rhythmic pattern in the line, but also the repetition of certain sounds, certainly the S's that we talked about, as well as this SH sound, which absolutely echoes a kind of hushing, right? Shame, shrink. Right before it, we have fresh, and then after it, we have shape. So SH is creating an echo of that sh kind of sound, right? Along with the S sound, both these kind of like fizzy, fizzy sounds that are happening in the poem. But sh in particular has a certain, meaning and connotation, which has to do with keeping quiet, which is at odds with what the speaker is saying, right? So there's a disjunction or tension created by the sh, 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 while the speaker is declaring that she's aiming to do the opposite of that, right? To speak out and to express herself and not blend in. Let's talk about the second part, which is this idea that the speaker is saying, because I was taught all my life to blend in, I want to blend out. And yet at the end is saying, you'll never be able to catch my pulse, my shine. What do people make of that journey from the beginning to the end? And especially, what do you make of the ending? Mona, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of related to what you're asking. I wanted to comment on the first line, I want. So because of this, I want, all the rest of that is saying what she wants. Up until you'll never be able to catch my pulse, my shine. So she wants to blend out. She wants all this. That little I want puts a whole nother spin in my mind on everything that follows. So it's like, did she do it or did she not? Is she doing this or is she not doing this? Because we don't really know. She says in the very end, a snake heart can slide up and down. So you'll never be able to. So does she do it? Does she really do it? Or is she just wanting to do this? And I don't even remember your question, but that's what I'm getting out of this. I like that I want at the end of the first line, and what follows is what she really wants to do, but I'm not sure if she does it.
Yeah, there's definitely the sort of feeling of potential, right? That comes from the I will, right? This is what the speaker aspires to do, aspires to be. And so the implication is, when I do, you'll never be able to catch my pulse or my shine, right? So it's sort of like an act in motion, right? And the speaker is dynamic and fluid, right? She's comparing herself, her want is compared to preschoolers stomping their boots, coins winking at you from the scatter bottom of a fountain, a red starfish wiggling, right? So there isn't, I think part of one of the things I really take away from Nezuko Matatil's work is this feeling of fluidity, right? It's not that she as a person and her identity are static. They're not going to be plugged into a box or pinned under a label. They're moving, they're full of dynamism. And that idea that at the end she's saying you won't be able to catch it, I think feels like resistance to the inclination to categorize and put labels on people, and even, you know, sort of a category of like, oh, I can't pronounce that name. And so I think that's what I take away in my reading of the poem. There's this sense of potential and fluidity and a kind of resistance to being pinned down, but rather being full of potential and movement and energy and really dynamic in that way. I'm curious about what other people thought. What are other people's responses to that journey from the beginning line to the end? Any other thoughts or responses?
I see from just reading the title, because it's in praise of the manicure. I do understand the way you could read it as a wanting, a longing for. I also see it as it could be actually really thrilled with the manicure. Someone who's walking into a salon and saying, I want the longest, brightest fingernails possible, you know, bring it on. And I've never been someone who's actually done that. It would be really amazing, I guess, to do that. But so I do see it as there's a sense of like, how dramatic can you describe how much you want these incredible fingernails? And that everything in between the first couplet and the last one are all the ways that the person could have their creative way in blending out.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea of, you know, extravagance or flamboyance or brilliance, right? Something that's very dramatic and stands out. The opposite, everything that's the opposite of blending in. And so this idea that it can't, you know, that it is in praise of the actual manicure, literally, like for its dazzling colors and shine. And those snake voices, you know, praising it, marvelous, fabulous. But it becomes figurative and symbolic too, right? Of the gesture of sort of coming into one's own and expressing oneself in ways that are unique to, you know, what it is this speaker wants to do or to be or to say, or in terms of her reaction, how she wants to be regarded. Rachel.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing I would add is I feel like, you know, there is some kind of reason behind having to blend in, some kind of perhaps danger, and she's defiant at the end, just basically saying, I'm going to do what I want to do and you're not going to be able to catch me anyway. So that undertone of, you know, being constricted and finding her freedom and not going back. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
No, that's very helpful. I think, you know, it speaks to a context outside the poem, right? That the poem is hinting at. The poem doesn't flesh it out completely, but it hints at it, right? Why was this speaker taught to blend in?
Yes.
And then in that context, what does it mean to blend out, right? To stand out and to claim one's individual identity and expression. And in just a moment, we'll read a little snippet on the next page that is written by the poet, a reflection on this poem in particular. Someone just raised their hand and it disappeared. I hate that when that happens. I'm sorry.
It's me. It's Anne Ellen.
Anne Ellen, and then there was one more. Go ahead, Anne Ellen.
I think on some level she's claiming her Katakali heritage. You know, it is different. And if this poem, she's living in, you know, America and she's claiming it proudly in a way with the colors and standing out, and, you know, tough on you folks if you don't like it. And I think there's a lot of power in this poem.
Yeah, the assertion, right, of her heritage, her background, her interest, her individuality. And we have clues in the poem of what, even if we didn't know that her father was South Indian and her mother is Filipino, the poem is giving us those context clues. Cass, it was you.
It was not me, but I have something to say. The last couplet, the snake heart can slide up and down the length of its body when it needs to. I get a sense of guardedness and a need to protect in that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a feeling that she's got backup, right? She's got these snakes that are hissing, right? Hissing words of praise for what it is she wants and what she desires. But their movements and their, the very fact that they're snakes adds a little edge, right? Adds a little element of bite where we'll see in the reflection that follows, that may have, that may be a way of symbolizing or expressing the idea of, whoever it is that comes up against this feeling of assertion stands to be, put in their place, so to speak. So, so there's definitely a little, it'd be very different if these hand gestures in the dance were some kind of more benign animal, like I don't know, like a mouse. Mice have sharp teeth, probably. I don't know, but they don't have the same connotations of the snake, something that's kind of slithering around that can, approach quietly, that might look, small or even hidden, but has fangs and potentially venom. So that all the intention behind the choice of snake really has a lot of impact on the poem and how we come to understand the speaker's new stance, right? Not the stance she was raised with, but the new stance in terms of standing out, blending out. Jung, and please tell me if I mispronounced your name.
Hi, this is yeah, it's Jung
Jung.
or Jung Hey, it's fine. Um yeah, I just wanted to add that I love the sort of these objects like coins and starfish, or I guess things from nature, but also things like coins and that seem to take on human qualities. So coins that who wink at you, and red starfish who wiggle a finger dance at you, and fresh sprout with no more shame, no more shrink, and then adding up to a snake that talks. It's, I guess, sort of when you sort of highlighted the movement in the poem. Yeah, it just, I don't know, like all these sort of, I think it's a very dynamic poem in the sense that you can't help sort of, or I couldn't help noticing these things that are like doing human-like things. And she's comparing her desire to, like, I want my fingernails to blend out like these things. So it's, it's I don't know, it's very intimate, I guess, and dynamic. So
Yeah, absolutely. Jung-hee, I'm glad you pointed out this part of the poem because we hadn't talked about what she's doing there, right? She's taking this abstract idea of blending out and making it more concrete through the use of these very vivid, very specific similes, blending out like preschoolers who stomp their boots, right? So there's this sort of emphatic and joyful expression, like coins who wink at you, right? So that's where we see these inanimate objects taking on human-like properties, and an element of, sort of like pushing against realism, right? This idea that's doing something human-like, which is beginning to set us up for those transformations that happen later with the dance moves turning into snakes, right? And then the red starfish, right? The starfish also taking on a human property, wiggling a finger dance at you. So these are subtle ways that poet is preparing us for this larger shift or transformation that's taking place that, of course, is also symbolic of and resonates with the speaker's transformation, right? She's changing. And so all of that shift and transformation and movement absolutely adds to the sense of potential energy and dynamic energy in the poem. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked about a lot of strategies here. I just want to point out in terms of syntax, there's this opening with because this, I want this. And that kind of setup is really, propels the reader into the poem where we read a certain part, the because X, then Y, our brains are hardwired to kind of seek out the answer that the because sets up. So we have syntax at work here as a way of opening the poem, engaging us and propelling us into the poem. we talked about the figurative language at work, right? There's similes at work here. There's a kind of, personification of inanimate objects, sensory details and narrative details, right? She's drawing on both to show and tell. Sonic properties, creating a lot of music here and echoing the kind of shh, right? Don't make a ruckus, don't rock the boat, don't stand out too much. And at the same time, the speaker speaking over and against that. Lineation, stanza, diction, we talked about all those things. So these are all different strategies we can take away for our own poems. And I'll share a prompt in just a moment. Jung-Hae, did you have your hand up again, or was that from before?
No, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
No, that was from before. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So here on the next page, you'll see that there are further questions to unpack the poem, if you'd like to take more time with it on your own. There's a reflection from, I want to say this is from Poetry Society of America. You can find the link here. Yeah, Poetry Society of America. Here's a reflection from the poet on her process of writing the poem, sort of what was behind it, and the different cultural aspects of at play, her upbringing here in the US, and her parents' heritage from both India and the Philippines, and of course, the difficulty of her name. And so I'm just going to read the last part, I think, for the sake of time, to make sure we have some time to do writing of our own. Okay, so written in 2018. I'll read these last two paragraphs. She's saying, but now it is 2018, when we have people in our government who think difference is something to fear or ridicule, or worse yet, to enact hurtful laws against. And I have two young sons who watch quietly when grown-ups, who ought to know better, make jokes of my last name, and my sons study my face now to see how I react. And it is 2018, and maybe I could take it and smile a strange smile before, but not now, not in front of my children. What lesson does my silence teach them, after all? There are 24 mudras, hand shapes, throughout this Kathakali dance form, and the snake gesture became the perfect vehicle to show why I stopped laughing, along with the purposeful mispronunciation of my beautiful name, stopped caring if people felt uncomfortable when I called people out for making jokes when introducing me. The metaphor of the manicure may, in fact, seem superficial, but I wear bright colors very purposely to remind me I can turn my arms, my fingertips into snake eyes, ever watching, never apologizing if I want to. So there we get that feeling of the resistance, and the bit of bite, right, that's coming from a place of having hidden or from being insulted. And then, the poet reflecting on the fact of her sons watching her reaction now, and her silence not serving her or the situation anymore. So with that, I'm going to move to the prompt, which I've called Unapologetically Yours. And the idea is that we're going to write a praise poem, which we might also phrase as a kind of ode. And I've been doing some thought experiments about, like, what if the title had been Ode to My Manicure? And we could take another hour to talk about examples of praise poems versus odes, and how the history of the ode poem. But in the limited time that we have, the idea is to write a praise poem or an ode to some aspect of yourself, something that you've hidden, diminished, or just overlooked. And the idea is to kind of investigate what happens when you focus the camera directly on this under-recognized aspect of yourself. So here are some additional, sort of elaboration of the prompt. Feel free to focus on something simple, or even something considered negative or seemingly mundane. In the case of the manicure here, it could seem like a very mundane topic, but you can see how Amy Nazuka-Matadil has turned it, into something much more complex than we might have imagined. Aim for something very concrete, or if you work with abstraction, for example, in praise of my temper, leverage sensory detail to see how you can make the abstract as concrete as possible. Think about what you want your reader to know, feel, and think about the object of praise. And you'll you can draw on both showing, right, the sensory details and narrative details or telling, just as we saw in Nezuko Matatil's poem. And then you can, in later, writing, maybe after today's session, you can also think about contextual information. What do your readers need to know to understand the significance of this aspect of yourself, whether it's a quality about you, an activity you enjoy, something you own? What aspects can you highlight and how in order to convey why you deem this aspect or thing worthy of elevation and celebration? And does the object of praise have some shadow aspects or vulnerabilities? And if so, how might you incorporate those and to what effect? So these are all, questions you can come to if you feel stuck, but the idea is to generate a big, messy draft that is turning the camera on some part of yourself that you've hidden or diminished in some way and just investigating. Is everybody clear on the prompt? I'm going to set a timer, but any questions? And if you get stuck, you can come back to this list. There are other tips, other questions to dig into down below under brainstorming and elaborating. Okay, I will set a timer for about 12 minutes with the idea that we'll do some quiet writing now to generate some rough material. Okay, that's the timer. So go ahead and wrap up whatever thought you're on. And maybe we can hear a couple of reflections on the process of writing. I won't ask you to read your draft material, but were there any, are there any reflections on the process of writing to this prompt, either discoveries or challenges or questions you're left with? And if not, that's okay. Mona, go ahead.
I'm such an open book. I had a hard time coming up with something, but I did.
That's great. So you had to dig a little to find some under recognized or hidden aspect of yourself.
Yeah.
Good for you. Thank you for sharing that. Is Elizabeth, right? Says Etan.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I really liked it. I think I kept thinking about how in the poem we just read all these amazing descriptions, like about the coins, and I kept wanting to try to come up with it. And then I realized I'm never going to write anything if I stop right now to try to do that. And so really inspired by that, but realizing that maybe later. So, and then also finding that the topic turned out to be more about my mother than about myself, which I know was not the goal. And then I was like, well, darn it, if that's what's coming up, that's what's coming up. So it still was very generative, regardless. And I guess to go back, I really liked how you talked about complicating, elaborating, and I can see that being something after this time.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely think about generating in, various iterations so that there's a first, really, really messy draft where you don't know where anything's going. And then there are other questions here to start digging, and to try to elaborate, deepen, or complicate whatever it is you have on the page. And sometimes that might be, asking about context, fleshing out context, whether that's with narrative detail or sensory detail. Fleshing out tone, drawing out the sources of tension. And I think it's great that you found, you sort of discovered the true topic of what you were writing about, and that it was actually much more about your mother than about you. And I like to think of every prompt as an invitation, rather than a sort of like a straitjacket. So if that's the discovery you arrived at through the prompt, that's terrific. You never have to feel bound to anything we're doing in class together. So thank you for sharing that. We're right up against time, so I invite you to spend time with this poem later. When you have time, use the questions that are in the PDF to dig further into it. Use the prompt and all of those sub questions underneath the main prompt to further develop your draft. And maybe a couple weeks out from today, put it away for a while, take it back out, see what's there, and see what you might want to pursue. If you are interested in signing up for my mailing list, this is a link that will take you to my mailing list to sign up, as well as various parts of my website with more information about the classes that I'm teaching. So I'll just close by saying thank you so much for joining me today to talk about the work of Amy Nazuku Matatil. I hope you feel inspired to write a poem of praise about whatever it is that's on your mind, and I hope to see you in a future class. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.